I never thought I'd sue an HOA until a California transplant tried turning my grandpa's hand-built road into her personal toll booth. I'm Dante. This 15-acre Colorado land and the gravel road my family shoveled in the 80s has been ours for 35 drama-free years. Then the new HOA prez slaps me with a $500 fine for unauthorized use on my own property. $500 to drive where I've lived my whole life. Felt like someone kicking in your door and charging rent for the floor. Blood boiling? You bet. What would you do if they came for your family legacy? I didn't just fight back. I built a new private road that locked them out forever, then flipped the script so they paid me. County's most legendary property smackdown ever. Stick around, this revenge will have you cheering. Where you from? Worst HOA fine story? Drop it below, I'll pin the craziest. Let me paint you the picture. My name's Dante Steele, 52 years old, retired construction foreman who thought inheriting my grandfather's 15-acre spread in rural Colorado would be the peaceful chapter of my life. This property has been in our family since 1987, back when the area was nothing but farmland and common sense. My grandfather bought it from an old rancher, and my dad and I spent that summer building the gravel road that connects our homestead to County Road 42. I was 16, all elbows and determination, hauling limestone gravel in our beat-up Ford pickup, one load at a time. Every morning for 35 years, I'd walk that road with my coffee, listening to the satisfying crunch of those stones under my boots, the smell of pine needles mixed with the faint diesel scent from our old Caterpillar sitting in the barn. That's what home smells like. That road wasn't just access, it was 3 generations of steel family backbone. Then 2019 rolled around, and some developer decided our quiet corner of Colorado needed luxury living. 37 McMansions sprouted up like expensive mushrooms, each one the same shade of suburban beige. They called it Meadowbrook Estates, complete with a volunteer HOA for property protection. I politely declined when they came recruiting. My land predated their little kingdom by 3 decades. Enter Bethany Kensington Walsh. 45, Orange County transplant, drives a white BMW she washes religiously twice a week. Designer athleisure that costs more than my monthly mortgage. Perfume so strong you could taste vanilla and entitlement from 50 yards away. Within 6 months, she'd gotten herself elected HOA president on a platform of elevating community aesthetics. The woman spoke exclusively in corporate buzzwords, like she was running a Fortune 500 company, instead of bossing around 37 families who just wanted to mow their lawns in peace. Here's where it gets interesting. My gravel road is a straight shot to the county highway, about 400 yards of perfectly maintained limestone that served 3 generations without a single complaint. Their subdivision route? A maze of cul-de-sacs winding around a decorative fountain that blocks half their main entrance. Guess which one delivery drivers prefer? Last spring, Bethany cornered me at my mailbox, clipboard in hand like she was conducting a corporate audit. "Dante, we need to discuss your road situation," she announced, not asked. "What situation would that be?" "This rustic gravel path is creating safety concerns and diminishing our community aesthetic. We'll need you to upgrade to asphalt, add decorative lighting, and landscape it to match our design standards." I blinked, hard. "Ma'am, this is private property, built to county specs with proper drainage and—" "Not anymore," she interrupted, her BMW keys jingling like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Your little shortcut affects our property values. The HOA board has voted to bring this into compliance." I could hear her acrylic nails tapping against her phone case, like a woodpecker with an anxiety disorder. "You voted on my private property?" "We voted on community standards that affect everyone." She handed me an official-looking paper. "You have 30 days to comply or face penalties. $500 for driving on my own road, on my own land, that my family built with our own hands." I stared at that fine notice, feeling like someone had just walked into my house and started charging me rent for my own kitchen table. "This is ridiculous," I said, keeping my voice level. "This road has been here since 1987. Times change, Dante. We're building something special here, and everyone needs to do their part." That's when the blood started boiling. This woman wanted to control something that had absolutely nothing to do with her, and she expected me to pay for the privilege of being bullied. I realized this wasn't about road safety or property values. This was about power. Bethany wanted to prove she could push around the old-timer who wouldn't kiss her suburban ring. She picked the wrong old-timer. Within a week, Bethany had organized what she called the Neighborhood Safety Committee. Sounds official, right? Wrong. It was basically a bunch of bored housewives with Ring doorbells and too much time on their hands, treating my driveway like it was some kind of national security threat. They set up a rotation schedule to photograph every single vehicle that used my road. License plates, timestamps, driver descriptions, the whole surveillance state package. My UPS guy started asking if he'd accidentally driven into some kind of witness protection program. The smell of fresh tar from their newly paved subdivision streets mixed with the dust from my gravel road, like the scent of old money trying to bury working-class history. Every morning I'd walk out to get my newspaper and see Karen's minivan parked strategically across the street, camera pointed at my entrance like I was running a drug cartel instead of just trying to live peacefully on my own land. Then came the masterpiece, a 47-page traffic impact study. 47 pages. About a gravel road that's handled farm equipment, delivery trucks, and 3 decades of family gatherings without so much as a fender bender. They documented everything from excessive dust particles to noise pollution from gravel displacement. I'm not making this up. They actually wrote gravel displacement in an official document with footnotes and everything. But Bethany wasn't done flexing her suburban authority. She convinced her little committee to start parking their cars near my road entrance during peak traffic hours. Suddenly, delivery trucks had to back up and navigate around strategically placed vehicles just to reach my driveway. My Amazon driver, a kid named Jake who'd been delivering to our area for 2 years, pulled me aside one afternoon, looking genuinely confused. "Mr. Steele, I gotta ask, what's with the weird people taking pictures of my truck?" "Neighbor dispute," I said. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Okay, but yesterday some lady in yoga pants demanded to see my delivery manifest and asked if I had proper authorization to be here. I told her this is America, not East Germany. She didn't think that was funny." Smart kid. I tipped him an extra 20. That's when their lawyer sent the nuclear option. A certified letter demanding $50,000 in remediation costs, plus permanent closure of my road. 50 grand. For the privilege of making their lives marginally less convenient when they had to drive an extra quarter mile through their own neighborhood. Time to do some homework. I spent a morning at the county clerk's office, pulling property deeds, surveys, and incorporation documents. Years of construction work had taught me that when someone's pushing you around with paperwork, you better understand what that paperwork actually says. That's where I discovered something interesting. Bethany's subdivision was built on land that used to be part of the old Morrison farm, the same farm my grandfather bought surplus acreage from back in 1985. I remembered something from a property dispute I'd worked on years ago. When your access road predates surrounding development by decades, you've got what lawyers call prescriptive easement rights. Basically, you can't be cut off from something you were using legally before the other guy even showed up. Johnny-come-latelys don't get to rewrite history just because they don't like the view. Armed with this knowledge, I filed a formal harassment complaint with the county, backed up with documentation proving my road had legal right-of-way that predated their entire subdivision by 32 years. Meanwhile, word was spreading through the real neighborhood, the folks who'd been here longer than Bethany's morning yoga routine. The Henderson family knocked on my door one evening, and Mrs. Henderson's usually cheerful face looked genuinely worried. "Dante, we wanted you to know we support you. That woman tried telling us our vegetable garden violated aesthetic standards and demanded we replace our tomatoes with ornamental shrubs." "She wanted you to get rid of your 40-year-old garden?" Mr. Henderson chuckled, but there was no humor in it. 40 years of growing our own food, and some California transplant wants us to plant decorative grass instead. We told her exactly where she could plant her suggestions. I was starting to realize I wasn't Bethany's only target, just the biggest one. My buddy Diesel Rodriguez, who owns Rodriguez Heavy Equipment, stopped by for a beer that weekend. We'd worked construction together for 15 years before I retired, and Diesel had a talent for reading between the lines. "Heard you're having some neighbor trouble," he said, settling into his usual chair on my porch. "Nothing I can't handle." "Well, If you need any construction equipment for, creative solutions to property disputes, just give me a call." He winked. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is with the right tools and a little professional expertise. But here's where things got really interesting. The county inspector who'd originally validated my road compliance called me privately the next week. "Mr. Steele, I thought you should know. Your HOA president tried to slip me an envelope with cash last week, $2,000. Asked me to reconsider my report and maybe find some violations with your road." My jaw nearly hit the floor. She tried to bribe a county official? Yep. I reported it to my supervisor and filed an ethics complaint. Thought you'd want to know what kind of person you're dealing with. Bribery. This woman was so desperate to control my property that she'd tried to corrupt a government inspector. That's when Bethany made her biggest mistake yet. She convinced the HOA board to install security cameras pointed directly at my road entrance and started issuing visitor violation notices to anyone who dared use my driveway. Picture this. Pizza delivery guy shows up at my house for our usual Friday night order, and 20 minutes later there's an official-looking notice stuck to his windshield, citing him for trespassing on community property. My poor pizza guy was so confused he called the shop, thinking he'd accidentally delivered to a government black site. 3 nights later, I discovered someone had scattered roofing nails across my road entrance, like some kind of twisted welcoming committee. Hundreds of sharp little sabotage devices, glinting in the morning sunrise, each one a metal middle finger aimed at my family's legacy. My security camera caught a figure in dark clothing around 2 a.m., face conveniently obscured, moving with the confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. The county crew that showed up with the magnet sweeper shook their heads as nail after nail stuck to their equipment. 30 years doing this job, the lead guy muttered, and this is the pettiest thing I've ever cleaned up. Somebody's got serious problems. While I was dealing with amateur hour sabotage, Bethany was carpet bombing every county department with false complaints. My junk cars, actually my perfectly restored 1979 Chevy, that won second place at last year's county fair. Unpermitted structures for the tool shed Dad built in 1995, with permits I had to dust off from my filing cabinet. Fire hazards for seasoned firewood that's heated our home for decades. Each bogus complaint triggered inspections that pulled county workers away from legitimate problems to chase down one woman's personal vendetta. But here's where 30 years in construction taught me something useful. When someone attacks you with bureaucracy, you fight back with better bureaucracy and twice the documentation. I started digging into Bethany's past, and what I found was absolutely beautiful. Our self-appointed neighborhood queen had been forced to resign from her previous HOA position in Orange County after what court documents politely called financial irregularities and abuse of authority. Her old community filed a class action lawsuit against her for selective enforcement and harassment. This woman had a pattern, and I was just her latest victim. But the real revelation came from county tax records. The HOA had been claiming my road as a community asset on their municipal filings to inflate their collective property values for tax purposes. They were literally using my private property to reduce their own tax burden while simultaneously trying to steal control of it. I'd seen this scam before on job sites, where developers claimed neighboring infrastructure as project assets to get better financing. When people start playing games with property ownership on government documents, they're usually hiding something much bigger. My Freedom of Information Act request hit them like a freight train. Dozens of emails between Bethany and county officials revealed a coordinated campaign of false complaints and attempts to manipulate local government against anyone who wouldn't kiss her ring. One email to the planning department was particularly revealing. Mr. Steele continues to operate his illegal road despite our community's legitimate concerns. Perhaps the county needs stronger enforcement action against individuals who disregard proper authority. Illegal road, that she knew perfectly well was completely legal and predated her entire subdivision by 3 decades. That's when local newspaper editor Janet Clearwater called. Mr. Steele, I've been covering property disputes for 15 years, and someone tipped me off about what's happening to you. This looks like the kind of abuse of authority our readers need to know about. I'd be happy to talk, but let's wait until I have all the pieces. This story's bigger than just neighbor drama. Then my property surveyor delivered the most beautiful piece of irony I've ever experienced. Not only did my family own our road outright, but Bethany's driveway encroached 3 feet onto my property right at the intersection. For 6 months, while fining me for using my own road, she'd been trespassing on my land every single day. The poetic justice was so perfect, I actually laughed out loud. My property rights attorney reviewed everything and delivered news that made my day. Dante, you've got grounds for criminal harassment charges, trespassing violations, and a civil lawsuit that could cost them more than their houses are worth. The question is, how far do you want to push this? I thought about Mrs. Henderson being bullied over her vegetable garden, about my pizza guy getting intimidated for doing his job, about 35 years of family history being treated like Bethany's personal property. Far enough to make sure no one else goes through this garbage. But I had a better idea than just suing them, something that would solve the problem permanently and give me a little satisfaction in the process. Time to call my buddy Diesel about that construction equipment. Bethany thought she could bully me into submission. She was about to learn the difference between messing with a regular homeowner and messing with someone who knew how to build things that last. Bethany's desperation was starting to smell worse than week-old fish, and desperate people make gloriously stupid mistakes. Her latest masterstroke was hiring a private investigator to follow me around like I was running a meth lab, instead of just trying to live peacefully on my own damn property. This PI, some wannabe detective in a wrinkled suit driving a dented Honda Civic, had all the subtlety of a marching band in a library. He photographed me buying lumber at Home Depot, depositing my pension check at the bank, eating breakfast at Murphy's Diner with the Hendersons, building what Bethany probably imagined was some kind of criminal profile, proving I was a dangerous community threat. The smell of burnt coffee and diesel exhaust from Murphy's parking lot mixed perfectly with the absurdity of being treated like Al Capone for the crime of existing on my own land. Meanwhile, she'd convinced her HOA minions to install decorative fence posts exactly 1 inch inside their property line, creating a visual barrier that made my road entrance look like I was trespassing onto their sacred community space. Petty, but clever in a pathetic, suburban dictator kind of way. But Bethany's real masterpiece was contacting Channel 7 News, with carefully edited security footage showing dangerous commercial traffic on my road, conveniently cropping out any context that would reveal these were just normal deliveries to my house on my private property. Her nuclear option came next, threatening to assess special fees against all surrounding properties for increased security costs and property devaluation caused by my non-compliance. Get the neighbors to pressure me into surrendering because her war against me was hitting everyone's wallet. What she didn't know was that I'd been 3 steps ahead of her for weeks. My professional-grade security system, the kind we used on construction sites to catch copper thieves, was capturing everything in crystal-clear high definition. When someone's playing dirty games, you document every move with legal timestamps and proper chain of custody that'll hold up in any courtroom. That investment paid off spectacularly when my cameras caught HOA board members trespassing to install their spy equipment, harassing delivery drivers, and, this is my favorite part, Bethany's private investigator accidentally photographing his own reflection in my truck's side mirror while illegally parked on my property. I filed police reports for stalking, harassment, and criminal trespassing, backed by video evidence so clear you could count the wrinkles in their guilty faces. Officer Martinez looked at the footage and whistled low. Mr. Steele, I've worked property disputes for 10 years, and I've never seen harassment this systematic and this stupid. These people are creating evidence against themselves. But the real game changer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door one evening, with fire in her 70-year-old eyes. "Dante, I need to tell you something. Bethany came to our house today and made me an offer." "What kind of offer?" "She said if we'd testify that your road creates safety problems for our grandchildren, the HOA would waive all our fees for the next 5 years, and maybe overlook some of our property violations." My blood went from simmer to full boil. "She tried to bribe you to lie about me?" "She sure did, and when I told her exactly what she could do with her bribe, she said we might find ourselves facing some expensive compliance issues if we didn't reconsider." That's when I realized this wasn't just about my road anymore. Bethany was running a full-scale extortion racket, using HOA authority to threaten and manipulate anyone who wouldn't play along with her personal vendetta. I'd learned from years of dealing with corrupt job site supervisors that bullies like this always overreach. They get so drunk on their tiny bit of power that they eventually threaten the wrong person or leave evidence that destroys them. Bethany had just made her fatal mistake. I called my buddy Jake at the county clerk's office. We'd worked together on a municipal construction project years ago, and asked him to take a closer look at the HOA's incorporation documents. What he found was beautiful. The original community covenant agreements that gave the HOA authority to enforce neighborhood standards had never been properly filed with the state. For 5 years, they've been operating under legal authority that didn't actually exist. Every fine, every threat, every harassment campaign had been backed by nothing more than expensive letterhead and Bethany's overwhelming confidence that no one would call her bluff. "Dante," Jake said, barely containing his excitement, "this HOA has been about as legally binding as a grocery list. They've been threatening people with authority they never actually had." That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, listening to the sound of gravel crunching under the tires of my neighbor's car as she used my road to get home. The same sound that had started this whole mess. But now, I had something better than just evidence of harassment. I had proof that everything they'd done was not only wrong, but completely illegal from day one. Bethany wanted to play power games with someone else's property. Time to show her what real power looked like when it was backed by actual legal authority and 30 years of construction experience. She'd picked a fight with the wrong guy, and tomorrow morning she was going to start learning exactly how wrong she'd been. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse with 35 years of family history burning in my chest and a determination that felt like my grandfather's calloused hands guiding the steering wheel. What I discovered in those dusty filing cabinets didn't just blow my mind. It detonated Bethany's entire world and handed me weapons she never knew existed. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. The developer who built Meadowbrook Estates had used completely fraudulent easement claims to get county approval. The access rights he claimed through my family's property? Pure fiction. My grandfather never sold anything to anybody, and I had the original deed to prove it. Mrs. Patricia Williams, the county clerk who'd worked there since Carter was president, pulled out a manila folder so thick it barely stayed closed. "Oh, honey, I remember this mess like it was yesterday," she said, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she opened the file. "Your poor father spent months coming in here, fit to be tied about what that developer was pulling. Look at this." She spread out survey documents side by side, the developer's fraudulent claims next to my family's original 1987 deed. The difference was stark as black and white. My grandfather owned not just our road, but access rights extending 200 feet into what was now their subdivision. The smell of old paper and bureaucratic frustration filled my nostrils as I realized the scope of what I was looking at. "The developer promised to purchase additional rights from your daddy," Mrs. Williams continued. "But when the deal fell through, he just went ahead with construction anyway, filed bankruptcy, and disappeared before anyone could hold him accountable." My hands shook as I held my father's complaint letters, dozens of them, documenting how he'd tried to fight this exact battle 35 years ago. He'd known what was happening, but one working-class family couldn't fight a developer with deep pockets and lawyers. Now his son had the chance to finish what he started. The financial records made my blood boil even hotter. For 5 years, the HOA had been collecting road maintenance fees, while simultaneously claiming my private road as their community asset on tax documents. They'd been profiting from stolen property while harassing the rightful owner. But here's what made me see red. Bethany knew everything. The developer's 2020 bankruptcy filing, buried in state court records, explicitly mentioned unresolved property disputes and potential liability for easement misrepresentation involving Meadowbrook Estates. Bethany had been elected HOA president just 6 months later. She'd seen the legal problems, understood the HOA's authority was built on fraud, and decided to solve it by bullying me into submission instead of coming clean about the mess she'd inherited. 6 months of harassment, false complaints, sabotage attempts, and threats, all designed to cover up the fact that her precious HOA had been operating illegally from day one. I sat in my truck outside the courthouse, holding documents that could destroy an entire neighborhood, and felt the weight of 36 innocent families who'd bought homes, believing they had legitimate community agreements. The nuclear option would expose everything: criminal fraud charges against Bethany, lawsuits that would bankrupt the subdivision, property values crashing like dominoes, justice, but at the cost of destroying people who'd done nothing wrong except trust the wrong leader. But as I thought about Mrs. Henderson being threatened with bribery, my pizza guy getting intimidated for doing his job, and my father's unfinished fight for justice, I realized there was a better way. I could give Bethany exactly what she'd been demanding: a demonstration of what real property ownership looked like when it was backed by actual legal authority and the skills to build something that would last forever. Time to call Diesel about that bulldozer. Bethany wanted control over roads? Perfect. I'd build her a masterclass in who really owned what around here. Monday morning, Diesel Rodriguez pulled into my driveway with his pickup truck, a surveyor's transit, and a grin that told me Christmas had come early for heavy equipment operators everywhere. "So," he said, stepping out and stretching like a man about to enjoy his favorite hobby, "I hear we're building something that's going to make your neighbors soil their designer yoga pants." "We're building education," I corrected. Everything their cramped subdivision streets lacked: turning radius for fire trucks, proper stormwater management, and infrastructure designed by people who actually knew what they were doing. Diesel squinted through his transit, calculating grades with the precision of someone who'd been moving mountains for 3 decades. "Dante, you realize what this is? You're not just building a road. You're building a big, beautiful middle finger that'll last 100 years and generate its own tax revenue. That's exactly what I'm building." While Diesel worked on engineering specs that would make county inspectors weep with joy, I coordinated the legal strategy with my attorney. 3-pronged attack: harassment lawsuit seeking damages, criminal fraud referral to the state attorney general, and administrative complaint that would dissolve their fake authority like sugar in a rainstorm. "The harassment case could net you 6 figures, my lawyer explained, but the fraud angle? That's going to trigger a domino effect. When 36 families discover their HOA has been operating illegally for 5 years, you're going to see some very entertaining community meetings. My road would be a monument to the difference between real authority and pretend authority. Engineered base material instead of dumped gravel. Storm drains that could handle Colorado flash floods instead of decorative ditches that turned into rivers. Pavement thick enough to support emergency vehicles, something their narrow subdivision streets couldn't handle without cracking like eggshells. I'd learned from decades in construction that when you're making a statement, you make it so perfectly that arguments become impossible. This road would exceed every county standard, while their infrastructure failed basic safety inspections. The permit applications were works of art. Every regulation exceeded, every environmental concern addressed with solutions their developer had never bothered considering. When county engineers reviewed my plans, they'd see infrastructure designed by someone who respected both the land and the law, a foreign concept in subdivision development. Meanwhile, my community coalition was growing faster than weeds after a spring rain. Mrs. Henderson introduced me to the Johnsons, whose teenage daughter had been cited for walking her dog on community property that was actually county right-of-way. The Martinez family threatened with fines for parking their work truck in their own driveway because it supposedly violated aesthetic standards. Every conversation revealed another story of Bethany's tyrannical overreach, and every story proved this wasn't about roads. It was about one woman's pathological need to control other people's lives. Sarah from the Property Rights Group connected me with a forensic accountant who specialized in HOA corruption. What she discovered in their financial records was absolutely delicious. "Dante," she said, spreading bank statements across my kitchen table like evidence from a crime scene. "Bethany's husband's landscaping company has received over $75,000 in no-bid HOA contracts. That's not just self-dealing. That's a family business built on embezzled homeowner fees." Thursday morning, the equipment convoy arrived like the cavalry in a Western movie. Diesel's heavy machinery parade parked legally on my property, but visible from every subdivision window. Excavator that could move small buildings, motor grader that could create perfectly engineered surfaces, compaction roller that would make pavement last decades, and dump trucks loaded with materials that cost more than most people's cars. The sound of diesel engines firing up in the morning mist was sweeter than a gospel choir, because it represented something Bethany would never understand: the difference between having authority and earning authority through competence and legitimate ownership. I'd timed everything for maximum psychological impact. Construction would begin during their monthly HOA meeting, ensuring every resident could watch real infrastructure being built by actual professionals, while they listened to Bethany's amateur hour power games. The final touch would be an elegant gate with crystal-clear signage: private road, authorized access only. Completely legal, perfectly enforceable, and absolutely devastating to anyone who'd claimed authority over other people's property. As the first excavator bucket bit into earth that had been mine for 35 years, I felt my grandfather's spirit nodding approval. Bethany wanted to learn about real authority. Class was about to begin. The sound of my excavator's first bite into Colorado soil, at 7 a.m. sharp, apparently triggered Bethany's final mental breakdown. By 7:15, she was speed dialing 911 like a woman possessed, claiming I was conducting illegal commercial terrorism and attacking the community with military-grade construction equipment. 2 patrol cars arrived before my coffee cooled. Officers Martinez and Thompson approached, while I operated the excavator with the smooth precision of someone who'd been moving mountains since before Bethany learned to spell property rights. "Morning, officers," I called, shutting down the beast and climbing out. "Beautiful day to build something that'll outlast us all." "Got a call about unauthorized construction," Officer Martinez said, but his raised eyebrow suggested he already knew whose time was being wasted here. I handed him my permits, all 6 of them, each one properly filed and professionally approved. County engineering sign-off, environmental compliance certificate, noise ordinance exemption for legal construction hours, even a wildlife impact assessment because we'd spotted a family of deer last spring. Officer Thompson examined the paperwork and shook his head. "Mr. Steele, this is more documentation than most commercial projects carry." "Ma'am," he called toward Bethany, who was pacing her property line in designer athleisure like a caged animal. "Please stop calling us unless there's an actual emergency. This is his private land with proper permits." But 911 calls were just Bethany's warm-up act. That night, someone cut the hydraulic lines on my excavator with surgical precision. $3,000 in damage, bright orange fluid painting my worksite like some kind of construction crime scene. The smell of hydraulic fluid mixed with morning dew was like the scent of desperation. Bitter, expensive, and completely stupid. My security cameras caught the saboteur in perfect high definition. Dark clothing, careful movements, and, here's the beautiful part, a distinctive pink cell phone case that glowed like a beacon in the infrared footage. Bethany's phone case, the same one she'd been waving around during every confrontation for 6 months. "Dante," Diesel said, examining the cut lines like a forensic expert. "Whoever did this knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. This wasn't random vandalism. This was targeted by someone with construction knowledge, or someone whose husband works in landscaping and knows heavy equipment. Same difference. Good news is, they just bought you a complete hydraulic system upgrade on their insurance company's dime. I'll have this machine running better than factory specs by tomorrow. But the sabotage backfired spectacularly. When I filed the police report with crystal clear video evidence, Officer Martinez whistled low. Mr. Steele, we've been dealing with escalating harassment complaints against this woman for months. This crosses the line from civil dispute to criminal vandalism. We'll be having a very serious conversation with your neighbor. While Bethany was explaining her nighttime construction activities to law enforcement, she'd launched a social media blitzkrieg that would have impressed a political campaign manager. Fake Facebook accounts, anonymous Nextdoor posts, even LinkedIn comments claiming I was mentally unstable and dangerous to community safety. Her masterpiece was a neighborhood flyer featuring my photo next to warnings about the problem neighbor who was destroying property values with illegal activities. She'd somehow made professional road construction sound like I was operating a meth lab. The emergency injunction hearing was where Bethany's legal strategy finally collapsed under its own weight. Her lawyer, clearly earning every overpriced dollar, had convinced a judge to schedule a community safety hearing based on her claims that my construction violated subdivision agreements. I arrived with my attorney, my permits, county engineering approval, and photographs showing construction quality that belonged in infrastructure magazines. Bethany showed up with printed screenshots from her fake social media accounts and what appeared to be hand-drawn diagrams of imaginary safety violations. Judge Harrison looked at our evidence like a man watching a chess match between Einstein and a goldfish. "Ms. Kensington Walsh," he said with the weary patience of someone who'd seen too many frivolous lawsuits, "Mr. Steele has proper permits for construction on his private property. Unless you can demonstrate actual legal standing, which you cannot since this is an HOA property, I'm dismissing your petition with prejudice and awarding Mr. Steele legal fees." But the real knockout punch came from County Inspector Williams, who'd apparently been waiting months for this moment. "Your Honor, I've inspected Mr. Steele's construction daily. It exceeds county standards for public infrastructure. Meanwhile, the subdivision in question has received 17 violation notices for failed drainage, surface deterioration, and inadequate emergency access. If anyone's creating safety hazards, it's not Mr. Steele." The gavel came down like thunder on Bethany's credibility. That's when the game changed completely. Walking out of the courthouse, my attorney pulled me aside with news that made the whole morning worthwhile. "Dante, remember that forensic accountant reviewing the HOA's finances? She found something interesting. Bethany's been embezzling homeowner fees to pay for her harassment campaign against you. Legal fees, private investigator costs, even fake social media consulting, all charged to the HOA budget without board approval." I stopped walking. "She's been stealing from her neighbors to fund her war against me? Gets better. The state attorney general wants to meet with you next week. Turns out your case isn't just harassment, it's organized fraud with multiple victims." Bethany thought she was fighting one stubborn property owner. She'd actually been digging her own legal grave with a stolen shovel. Bethany's final desperate gambit was a $100,000 lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, filed with the dramatic flair of someone who'd watched too many legal dramas and understood none of them. The complaint read like a soap opera script, claiming my systematic intimidation campaign had caused her severe psychological trauma and irreparable damage to her standing in the community. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast, but filing frivolous lawsuits was apparently just her Tuesday warm-up. Wednesday night brought a new level of stupid that even I hadn't anticipated. My security cameras caught HOA board member Dave Peterson placing road spikes across my driveway entrance at 2 a.m., working with the methodical precision of someone following detailed instructions. What made this particularly beautiful was that Dave had clearly forgotten about the motion-activated floodlights I'd installed after the hydraulic fluid incident. He looked like a deer in headlights, literally, as my cameras captured his license plate, his face, and the distinctive HOA logo on his jacket in crystal clear high definition. "Mr. Steele," Officer Martinez said the next morning, examining the evidence with something approaching professional admiration. "In 15 years of police work, I've never seen suspects document their own crimes this thoroughly. It's like they wanted to get caught. Dave's arrest for criminal mischief and attempted property damage sent shockwaves through the subdivision. Apparently, when the handcuffs clicked shut in his own driveway, while neighbors watched from their windows, the reality of Bethany's leadership style finally hit home. But she wasn't done yet. Her next brilliant idea was contacting the state environmental agency, claiming my road construction threatened sensitive wetlands and demanding an immediate investigation. The environmental team that showed up Thursday morning spent exactly 47 minutes examining my property, my construction permits, and my professionally engineered drainage system before issuing their verdict. "Mr. Steele," the lead inspector said, "your road actually improves local water management compared to the subdivision's infrastructure. Meanwhile, we're citing the HOA for several drainage violations that have been creating real environmental problems for years." The citation she handed me was addressed to Meadowbrook Estates HOA board and detailed $15,000 in fines for inadequate stormwater management and illegal discharge into county waterways. Bethany had called environmental authorities on me and ended up getting her own organization fined for the exact problem she'd claimed I was creating. Meanwhile, my road was nearing completion and looking like something you'd see in architectural magazines. Perfect drainage channels, engineered base material that would last decades, and a surface so smooth you could land small aircraft on it. The visual contrast with their subdivision's crumbling infrastructure was becoming a tourist attraction. Families drove out from town just to see that amazing private road and compare it to the pothole-infested nightmare next door. But the real game changer came when my new road officially opened with a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by county commissioners, local media, and half the neighborhood. The access control system was a masterpiece of legal precision. Electronic gates with clear signage reading, "Private Road, Property Owner Authorization Required." "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the gathered crowd, "this road demonstrates what's possible when you combine proper planning, professional construction, and respect for actual property rights. It's built to last 100 years and will require zero taxpayer funding for maintenance." The applause was sweet, but Bethany's face through her kitchen window was sweeter. She was watching her entire worldview collapse in real time, as the community celebrated infrastructure built by the man she'd tried to destroy. That's when Janet Clearwater's newspaper story broke regionally, picked up by property rights advocacy groups, and broadcast news as an example of successful resistance to HOA overreach. The headline read, "Local Man Builds Better Road, Exposes Systematic Fraud." The article detailed everything: the harassment campaign, the fraudulent easement claims, the embezzlement scheme, and the criminal charges piling up against HOA leadership. My story had become a symbol for property owners across the state dealing with similar abuse. But the final nail in Bethany's coffin came from an unexpected source. Her private investigator, the same guy she'd hired to follow me around, called my attorney with information that made Christmas morning look like a minor holiday. "Mr. Steele," my lawyer said, barely containing his excitement, "Bethany's PI quit after she asked him to plant drugs in your truck and then discover them during a staged traffic stop. He's prepared to testify that she solicited him to commit multiple felonies as part of her campaign against you. Evidence tampering, solicitation of drug possession charges, conspiracy to file false police reports. Bethany hadn't just been harassing me. She'd been planning to frame me for crimes to justify her harassment. As I stood on my beautiful new road, watching county officials use it as a detour around the subdivision's failed infrastructure, I realized something profound. Bethany's war against me had exposed her as a threat to every honest person in the community. Tomorrow's HOA meeting was going to be very, very interesting, and I'd be watching from my side of the gate, the side with actual legal authority and infrastructure that worked. The HOA annual meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the subdivision's community center, but my show started at 6:30 with the arrival of Channel 7's news van, 3 county commissioners, and a state prosecutor who'd driven 2 hours just to watch Bethany's world implode on live television. I'd timed everything perfectly. While HOA members filed into their meeting, drone cameras were capturing side-by-side footage of my pristine new road versus their subdivision's infrastructure disaster. The visual contrast was devastating. My professional-grade asphalt gleaming in the evening light next to their pothole-riddled streets that looked like they'd been bombed by incompetent contractors. Inside the community center, Bethany opened the meeting with the confidence of someone who still believed she controlled the narrative. She'd prepared what she clearly thought would be her victory speech, demanding I pay $25,000 in community restoration fees and surrender all access rights to my family's road. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice echoing with the authority of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience, "tonight, we finally resolved the situation that has threatened our community's safety and property values for months." She had no idea that half her audience already knew what was coming. My attorney stood up from the back row like a prosecutor ready to deliver closing arguments. "Before we discuss Mr. Steele's road, perhaps we should discuss the legal foundation of this organization's authority to make such demands." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He opened his briefcase with theatrical precision and began distributing copies of documents that would change everything. The fraudulent easement claims, the embezzlement evidence, the criminal charges against board members, and the state attorney general's investigation findings. "Ladies and gentlemen," he continued, "for 5 years, this HOA has operated without legitimate legal authority. The original community agreements were never properly filed, the easement rights were fraudulent, and your fees have been systematically misappropriated." The silence in that room was so complete, you could hear Bethany's world crashing down in real time. County Engineer Williams stepped forward with his own presentation. "I've inspected both road systems extensively. Mr. Steele's private road exceeds all county safety standards, while this subdivision has accumulated 17 infrastructure violations that pose actual dangers to residents and emergency responders." That's when State Prosecutor Jennifer Hayes dropped the nuclear bomb. "Mrs. Kensington Walsh, you're under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, criminal harassment, and solicitation of evidence tampering. The State Attorney General's office has evidence of systematic abuse of authority affecting multiple families in this community." Bethany's face went through more color changes than a traffic light malfunction. But the real mic drop moment came when I stood up and addressed the room full of my neighbors. People who'd been bullied, threatened, and financially manipulated by the woman who claimed to protect their interests. "Folks," I said, feeling 35 years of family history backing every word, "I didn't build that road to spite anyone. I built it to demonstrate the difference between real authority and fake authority, between actual ownership and pretend control." The room erupted in applause that had been building for months of suppressed frustration. "That road will serve as the main access route to our community, while your subdivision's infrastructure gets the repairs it desperately needs. And unlike the leadership you've endured, it'll be maintained professionally, transparently, and without anyone getting robbed to pay for it." Janet Clearwater's cameras captured every second as 3 HOA board members resigned on the spot. 2 families announced their intention to sue for fraud recovery, and Bethany sat frozen in her chair, like someone watching her entire universe collapse. Sheriff's deputies served warrants for the financial fraud investigation, while local news crews documented the end of what they'd already dubbed Colorado's most corrupt HOA. The final image was perfect. County emergency vehicles using my road as the primary access route, while the subdivision's failed streets sat empty except for repair crews, documenting decades of infrastructure neglect. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, I walked outside to my beautiful new road, listening to the sound of gravel crunching under the feet of neighbors who were finally free to use quality infrastructure without someone demanding tribute for the privilege. Bethany had wanted to control my family's legacy. Instead, she'd given me the opportunity to build something better than she'd ever imagined, while exposing herself as everything wrong with petty suburban authoritarianism. Justice served with a side of perfectly engineered asphalt. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my porch with my morning coffee, listening to the sound of school buses using my road to safely navigate around the construction crews, still fixing the subdivision's infrastructure disaster. The new HOA leadership publicly apologized, not just to me, but to every family Bethany had bullied, threatened, or financially manipulated during her reign of suburban terror. The criminal trial made regional headlines. Bethany pleaded guilty to embezzlement, fraud, and harassment charges, receiving 2 years probation, community service, and restitution requirements that'll keep her paycheck garnished until she's collecting Social Security. Her insurance company settled the harassment lawsuit for enough money to fund something I'd been dreaming about since this whole mess started. The Dante Steele Family Scholarship for Construction Trades sends 2 kids every year to Colorado Technical College, focusing on young people who want to learn how to build things that last, instead of just managing things other people built. Last spring's recipients were Maria Santos, whose family had been threatened by Bethany for parking their work truck in their own driveway, and Tommy Henderson, whose grandmother's garden gnome citation had triggered his interest in property rights law. My road has become the unofficial main artery for our entire area. When the county's engineers needed examples of proper private infrastructure for their training manual, they used my construction specifications. When environmental groups wanted to showcase sustainable drainage management, they brought tour groups to see how real stormwater systems work. Property values in our area actually increased after Bethany's removal, partly due to the infrastructure improvements, but mostly because potential buyers no longer worried about purchasing homes in a community ruled by a petty dictator with questionable legal authority and flexible ethics. The old subdivision streets finally got proper repairs after the county condemned them as safety hazards. Turns out, when you build roads to actual engineering standards, instead of whatever's cheapest, they last decades instead of years. But the real victory isn't the money or the media attention, or even watching Bethany pack her U-Haul under court order to relocate outside the county. The real victory is walking out my front door every morning and seeing kids riding bikes on infrastructure built to protect them, emergency vehicles that can actually navigate our roads, and neighbors who understand the difference between legitimate community cooperation and authoritarian control. Mrs. Henderson still tends her vegetable garden, now expanded to include a section dedicated to freedom tomatoes that she swears taste better than any HOA-approved ornamental shrubs. The Martinez family parks their work truck wherever they damn well please on their own property. And Dave Peterson, the former board member who scattered road spikes across my driveway, now works part-time on my construction crew, having learned more about honest labor in 6 months than he did in 5 years of HOA politics. We started an annual Property Rights Day celebration every 4th of July, featuring tours of proper infrastructure, workshops on legal property protection, and barbecue served by people who understand that real community comes from mutual respect, not mutual intimidation. The County Property Owners Association that grew out of this mess now provides legal resources and advocacy for families dealing with HOA overreach across 3 counties. We've helped 12 families successfully challenge corrupt boards, and we're just getting started. Sometimes I get calls from property owners in other states facing similar harassment. I tell them all the same thing: document everything, understand your legal rights, and never let anyone convince you that their authority matters more than your legitimate ownership. But most importantly, if someone wants to play power games with your family's legacy, make sure you're ready to build something better than they ever imagined.
You know what gets me about Dante's story? It wasn't the $500 fine that mattered. It was Bethany pointing at his grandfather's road and saying, "This belongs to us now." Some folks think Dante went overboard building an entire new road just to make a point. But they don't get what it's like when someone tries to steal what your family built with their own hands. That wasn't just asphalt. That was a middle finger paid in professional grade engineering. $75,000. That's how much Bethany funneled from HOA fees to her husband's landscaping company while harassing Dante for using his own driveway. All that helped just to afford a war against one guy who wouldn't bow down. Dante Road is still there, built to last a century, Bethany authorities. Ended the day the handcuffs clinked shut. Makes you think about your own HOA board, doesn't it? How many meetings have you sat through watching someone with a clipboard pretend they own your property? If this is his home, smash that like button and share it with anyone fighting their own sovereign dictator. Subscribe for more stories of regular people who refuse to back down. Because here's the truth: the tiniest bit of power always creates the biggest disaster.